Natasha, thank you so much for taking some of your precious time to be here with me today and talk a little bit about your journey with the ketogenic diet for mental health and specifically your experience with ADHD. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited about this.
Good, good. No, I'm excited too. So I'm really hoping this work is so important, and I'm hoping that, some of your viewers are going to find that this information is going to be very helpful for them.
That's my hope and goal as well. And this is why we're doing this work. A little bit about how we met. We were together at the Integrative Medicine for Mental Health conference in DC. And we just really connected in terms of our experiences with the ketogenic diet and how much good it has done in our lives. And it's always fun to share that excitement and that understanding with someone who has the lived experience. And even though it's in a different kind of different symptoms that we have used this treatment to benefit from, like in my case, it was the bipolar, and in your case, it's ADHD, we were equally excited and kind of signed up for this way of treating disorders just because we knew it firsthand. And I thought it's really, really inspiring to see more cases where people treat different symptoms as an expansion on that brain energy theory of Dr. Chris Palmer that we all love and follow, where he says that it's just the brain energy disorder, right? Like the need for a proper source of energy that resolves a wide range of symptoms. So I'm excited to present your case with like your experience with ADHD, because that's a topic that hasn't been so much talked about, I feel like,
Hmm.
yet. And
Hmm.
I know that there are so many people though that may benefit. So I'm super excited and looking forward to dive in. And so tell us about your experience with ADHD and what led you to explore keto.
Yeah, okay. I'll start off by just giving a little bit of an introduction about myself. So my name is Natasha Smikles, and I'm actually a registered psychiatric nurse. And I think that that's also an important part of the story I'm going to share today, because as you and I both know, ketogenic diets aren't really spoken about in the mental health field. And it wasn't really up until last year that I could gain a really good understanding of how powerful these interventions can be. So I've worked about 18 years in the mental health field. So I've worked everywhere from acute psychiatry, crisis services. In the last 10 years, actually, it will be 10 years in June. I'll have had 10 years in my own private practice. And a lot of the clientele that I've worked with are specifically adults who struggle with mood disorders, depression, and I work a lot with people who also have borderline personality disorder. So a lot of individuals who struggle immensely with emotion regulation is kind of where I've been specialized. For myself personally, I was diagnosed with ADHD later in life. So I wasn't diagnosed officially up until 2022. So this is very recent for me in a lot of ways. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I came across finding out that I had the diagnosis, because it was um, not really, it was kind of surprising how it came about. It wasn't something that I really sought out. It was more so kind of a cluster of events that happened. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about how that shifted into keto and how that's been so incredibly helpful and effective for me. So
Perfect.
yeah, so I had an event that happened in 20, it was like fall of 2021, and then I got formally diagnosed in 2022. And I always thought I was the kind of person, I was high energy, always feeling kind of anxious, really unsettled. So I always thought that I was just a highly anxious person and nothing more than that. And I had an event that had happened in that fall of 2021 where my husband and I, we were going to go and pick up our friends, and we were going to be going to a football game. And the morning of, my husband said to me, he's like, okay, we need to leave the house by 1 o'clock to pick up our friends. And can you please make sure that you take our dog for a walk? You're going to want to go do some cardio. So, make sure you get your time on the cardio bike in. And let's just make sure that there's enough time for you to get ready. So even as I'm looking back talking about this, he was already cluing in that it takes me time to do the things that I need to do, right? So with ADHD, there's a lot of difficulties with organization. And
Mm-hmm.
somehow he knew that without me recognizing how detrimental that could be. So that day, I get up, I'm getting ready. And what ended up happening was I did not have time to do my cardio. I got sidetracked numerous times. I did not take the dog for a walk. Instead, I gave the dog a bath. Why I gave the dog a bath, I don't know. My husband started prompting me to get ready. I had to change my outfit numerous times because I couldn't quite figure out what I'm wearing for this event. And then we still end up being late. So in this car ride, my husband, who's frustrated, said, he's like, I don't know what else to do. Like, I gave you prompts. He's like, what is happening? What is going on? And I just kind of sat there and I'm like, I actually don't really know. And then I said to him, I'm like, could I have ADHD? And he goes, he's an engineer, he knows nothing about mental health. He goes, well, I don't know. Could you? And for me, it just kind of started this like snowball effect of like, I don't know anything about ADHD because I've typically worked with people who have mood disorders, personality disorders, and I find this a lot with clinicians now. There's a lot of stigma attached to an adult getting diagnosed with ADHD. And I was one of those clinicians at one point in time because I didn't know anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if I worked more with like children, adolescents, I would have seen more of that and had a better understanding. But
Yeah.
that was never my skill set or my focus in my professional career, so I didn't know much about it. So this kind of led me on this journey about learning more about ADHD. And it was so funny because even when I pulled up a basic questionnaire, we're in that car, I go to him, do you think I could have ADHD? He's like, I don't know, do you? And I'm like, I don't know. So I pulled up this questionnaire, and in my mind, I'm like, I can't have ADHD. Like, I run, like I have a couple businesses that I run and people depend on me. And I completed a master's degree in 2023 with distinction. Like, I perform well in academic settings. So in my mind, I'm like, I don't have this at all. And I'm running through these questions, and the first one is like, do you forget things? And I'm like, no, I don't. And my husband's like, no. He's like, this morning you forgot this, 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 and this. And then I move to the next thing. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't apply. And he's like, it does apply. He's like, because of this, 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 and this.
Yeah.
So I really had to rely a lot on his feedback to even come to this realization of what my behaviors were doing. So I
Mm-hmm.
think for a lot of people with ADHD, what will often happen when they're not getting diagnosed is they'll still have a lot of the behaviors and the patterns, but they can be in situations where those things aren't detrimental enough to realize that they have to make a change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So after we had that car ride, I started tracking all of those behaviors for a week. I made a list of the ADHD behaviors. I started looking to see what I was doing. And in 1 week, I forgot, and this is like a 5-day work week, I forgot my lunch 3 times. I was supposed to bring office supplies to the office, which I forgot twice. And I forgot my computer charger one day. So I was forgetting things, but I didn't realize I was forgetting things because those things, if I forgot a lunch, I can get DoorDash. If I forgot the computer charger, I can find another solution for that. So they weren't detrimental enough for me to be like, I need to really make a change or seek out a diagnosis here or figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Interesting when you actually start tracking, right? The power of seeing it accumulate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
And I think the other thing here too, Donica, is you have to remember, like, with ADHD, this is the way my brain has functioned my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like something like, let's use bipolar as an example. It's not like I had a shift or a change at one point in my life and I had a comparable, right? I always functioned this way to some extent. So how would I have known any different really, because it's the way that I've always thought or the way I've always acted or behaved. It didn't seem abnormal to me, and my environment kind of allowed it in some ways, and I was
Hmm.
able to come up with solutions when something just didn't work out and move on.
Right. Yeah, that's such a great point, and that makes so much sense. Yeah,
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. So when I sought out, when I was kind of like, "Oh, could this actually be what's going on?" You know, at first I sought out the advice of a friend slash colleague who is a psychiatrist, and I kind of said, I'm like, I think that I could be, maybe I have ADHD and I'm not 100% sure. So he really walked me through like, okay, this is what we would see more in the female population with ADHD. So he's kind of asked me more of those questions like, does your mind drift a lot, right? Like the impulsivity might show up differently. He kind of said too, like, you could perform really well academically if that's the thing you're really interested in and hyper focused in, you
Hmm.
know? So it's like you ask me to perform well in something I'm interested in, I'll blow that out of the water, I'll do really well. You give me a shopping list to go to the grocery store, I will come back with maybe one of 5 items, if that, a bunch of things I don't need, and
Uh,
have lost myself in there for an hour, right? So it's kind of like this I can function incredibly well in certain settings, and then I just cannot function appropriately at all in others.
yeah.
So yeah. So he kind of gave me a little bit of feedback on like what would we see typically in female presentations. And then externally from him, I got a diagnosis from a psychiatrist. And it was funny because even at that time, it was just a lot to take in, being like, wow, okay, I work in this field, I work in mental health. How did I not know? Right. So, like, maybe a little bit of like shame and embarrassment in myself as a clinician. Right? And then there's this piece too where it's kind of like, okay, try not to be hard on yourself because this is how you've always been. How would you know? Right? If no one had ever picked up on it.
Mhm.
Which I actually found out later on it was picked up on when I looked at old school report cards. But, but it wasn't, really
It
well
was
known
not
at that time when
disturbing
I was in
enough.
school.
Yeah.
Pardon?
I'm saying it was probably not disturbing enough, especially compared to your high functioning results, like the academic performance. It makes
Yeah.
so much sense. And I'm sure this can be eye-opening for so many people that may be dealing with the same issue. I'm almost like when I listen to you, I'm almost like starting to question myself and am I having it? Because yeah, when you put it in that clear perspective as you did, how actually you can be so good and accelerating in certain field academically especially but not do well with like a simple shopping list. I think it's a really good
Hmm.
way to put it, and it's a good reference. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
interesting.
And it was kind of funny too, because even when I got diagnosed, I got diagnosed, I started medication, which I can go into a little bit more. And even then, it's like I still didn't fully believe this could be a possibility. So
Mm.
I waited about 8 months and then I went and sought out a second opinion from another clinician altogether just to make sure. And that clinician was like, no, like it's pretty clear cut. Like this is what's going on. So there was a lot of like I guess almost non-acceptance. Like it took me a long time to actually kind of come to this realization that this does apply to me and, I actually do have, I guess we would now call it like a neurodivergent, right?
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, but I'm glad you did, even though later in life at one point. So tell us more about your experience with discovering keto. Like, what even hinted you that keto may be applicable to this type of symptoms? How did you learn about
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to have to backtrack a bit because I have kind of a few things that led up to that thought. So when I was diagnosed, I was put on a stimulant medication, and that was kind of the first time in my life that I can recall where it was like, wow, I actually feel like I can relax. I didn't have this pent up energy. I didn't feel like I had to be going all the time. I wasn't ruminating. I wasn't anxious. I could just like be in the room, and I'm just in the room. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
felt really nice. It felt pleasant. But the side effect of that is the medication wears off in the evenings, you crash really bad. And then I always felt like I was hit by this tidal wave, of feeling anxious again and pent up energy and racing thoughts. And it was really unpleasant. And when I was going through that process, I remember thinking, you know what? I tried a ketogenic diet 5 years prior. So before I even knew I had ADHD, it was around 2017. And I feel like at that time, keto was really big. You were hearing a lot about it in terms of like weight loss management.
Right.
So I remembered that I had tried keto in 2017. And at that time, there was two other colleagues I worked with that also tried it. The reason I tried it was I had a client who said, I went on a ketogenic diet and I feel substantially better. So
Oh,
I was like, well, I'm going to try this too and just see what it is like. And by sheer coincidence, a psychiatrist that I was working with and a psychologist that I was working with, they were both also doing keto just for various reasons. I think they were also kind of like, what is all this hype? And let's see what it does. So the three of us ended up doing keto at the same time for our own reasons. And I remember them kind of, just talking about what they were noticing. And at that time, I'm not even kidding you, Donica, I kept telling them over and over, I'm like, my mind is so clear. My mind is so clear. Like, it was
okay.
like nothing I had ever really encountered before. And they were
Yeah.
kind of like, well, we aren't really getting that effect. And I was like, no, you guys, like, my mind is like so amazing. I'm consistent, and the reason why I stopped that diet is at that time, I feel like I had to go really dairy heavy in terms of getting my fats in, and dairy doesn't agree with me. And there
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a lot, like, now there's so much resources on ketogenic diets in terms of like recipes and how to get the right macronutrients and the right types of foods, where at
Yes.
that time I had this idea that like a lot of my fats have to come from dairy and cheeses and cream, and that's not the case necessarily, right? But that's kind of all I knew at that time. So I quit the diet because I physically just kind of felt bloated and I didn't necessarily feel good because I don't do well with dairy.
Yeah. Yeah. I can
So that
totally
was the
imagine.
only,
And probably you
yeah,
were realizing at that time the impact of why you feel so good, like being related to the diet. So you didn't understand that that may be taken away with discontinuation of the diet, which is probably
yes,
not a good deal. But I can
yeah,
still relate to that feeling of just a sharper brain, clarity, the brain fog is gone. And I also got a sense of that while fasting. And then with keto, it was just consistent, which is, oh my gosh, what a blessing.
yeah,
Maybe more of
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. So I remember, after being on medications for a few months, so I took the stimulant medication Concerta very consistently for about a year. And I remember thinking, like, I wonder if a ketogenic diet would help because I had this experience back in 2017. And then you kind of start to second guess yourself. You're almost like, did I really have that experience? Did I make it up? Like, was there something to that? And at that time, I kept looking to see if I could find anything in the literature to support that, and it didn't exist,
Yes. Yes.
right? Because everything that's kind of come out with ketogenic diets has just been really since 2024 that you're starting to see more and more of these studies coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I remember I had the thought kind of in like 2022, 2023 from time to time. I had even told my husband, I'm like, I wonder if a ketogenic diet would help, but I couldn't find evidence. I couldn't find research to support it. And then it was probably about a year ago, because it would have been last year, probably in January, maybe February, I came across a podcast. It was Chris Palmer, and he was speaking on a podcast about ketogenic diets and mental health. And I was just like, there it is. I was like, I was right. I shouldn't have second guessed myself
I
because
love
I
it.
suspected there could be something with this diet. And then I went on a Chris Palmer rabbit hole with his brain energy theory, and I watched multiple podcasts that he was featured on. I read the book. And then in March, I decided to go on a ketogenic diet. And I've been on that since. Like there's the odd time where I've kind of like, slowly fallen off for maybe a day, but all the symptoms come back as soon as my ketone levels drop. And then I'm like, nope, we'll get back on track.
Wow.
So that's kind of how I got reintroduced to keto, I guess.
Yeah, thank God we got that brain energy, all of us, to just solidify our experience. Because funny enough, even if we feel better, it's different when you have the explanation and that theory being scientifically backed up.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
different level of security and knowing, as you mentioned, how to do it safely with the right foods and all that. So what a relief. I'm so happy you discovered it. And then when you transition, tell us, how did you do that intervention differently this time? Did you have any challenges while starting on keto? How was that process?
Yeah. I think so. I think when I started in March, I already knew a little bit of what I was in for, and I already knew I got to look at different fat sources other than dairy because that is the reason I primarily quit the last time.
Mm-hmm.
So I did find that there's so many more keto options in terms of recipes on the internet that were not there 5 years ago. So that made the diet a lot easier to stick to. Um, and this time around too, I started off with using Carb Manager as a tracking app
Mm-hmm.
to really try to figure out the macros. And then I would find, like for myself, so I know I mentioned previously, like I was the kind of person, you stick me in a grocery store with a list, I come back with one thing, I'm lost in there. I could not cook for the life of me. If I had to follow a recipe, I'm not like, and I don't have an ingredient, I'm definitely not going to go to the store to get it. I'm going to try to substitute something, or I'm going to be impulsive and be like, I'm just throwing whatever in there. And it never turns out good. So I didn't cook prior to keto because anytime I tried cooking, it was a complete disaster. And it was really not appetizing. So what I did this time around is I made it simple. I just kind of came up with a handful of things I could eat. So the morning could be like MCT oil in my coffee. I would make a big tray of bacon and just kind of have that in my fridge that I could heat up on the go, hard boiled eggs. So made that simple. My lunch on the weekend, I would just make one kind of keto casserole. So it could be like there's like a good like chicken artichoke, with cream cheese, and I could throw a lot of extra fats in that. That would be my lunches for work. And then the evening might be like some kind of a meat with a veg. So I kept it as simple as I could, which worked phenomenally because I just knew I just got to like get these macronutrients in. Like it's not even so much at that point about like enjoying the food, even though I actually did enjoy the food, but that wasn't the main objective or the focus. The main objective or the focus was trying to get those, the high fats in there, trying to get the carb count down, and to really trying to eliminate the sugars. And then once that became easier, and I mean, for me, starting the ketogenic diet within 3 days, like boom, mind was completely clear, and all of that got easier for me. So then I was able to find more recipes, make things that were a little bit more complex, right? And start adding those into a rotation. And now I feel like once you kind of get a feel for what you should be eating, you just kind of know. The other thing that I've been doing, and that I had a couple clients do too, is when you get really stumped, AI is great for that. You can just like go into like a chat AI and just say, make me ketogenic snacks. Boom, boom, boom. This is what's in my fridge. It'll tell you. So
Yeah.
I actually have utilized AI before too, when I'm just stumped or I just don't even know what to eat. And that's actually helped quite a bit.
Yeah, I can so relate with that concept of letting it be easy at first until you start gaining all the benefits. For me, that process was even longer because, and I want to double click on the thing that you said. it was not even about the food. Like when you're in to get a better mental health, a better improved quality
Mm.
of life, when you start feeling your brain is working like never before, is you're just like literally a different human being. Your capacities increase. It's no longer about bread or taste. This is so much more. What you're getting is so much more than what you're giving up. And that's my motto in terms of how people are successful. Once you touch that, you just don't want to give up. Like it's not a good deal for you to let it. Nothing is worth messing that up. And I just also so confirm that keeping it easy is extremely helpful at first. And then with time, you can mix things up, but it's so crucial, even not for someone with ADHD. It's just like getting into something new. You don't know that much, all the foods that are like you have to check everything, right?
Mhm.
It's compliable with the diet and all that. But like if you have a few go-tos that are within your macros and you just stick to those, it makes it so much easier. But
Oh,
yeah.
totally. And you know what? And that's also too where I found the Carb Manager app handy. Is there's a keto setting in there, and if you enter a food, it'll tell you if it's keto friendly or not keto friendly. And that actually helped me quite a bit too, in terms of like, can I eat these blackberries or can I eat, no, something like a banana? And it's like, no, keto, yes, right? Like, so
Yeah.
that was very helpful with the learning experiences, just to use that kind of technology where it's in our phone. We have our phones all the time. Just a quick check, like, is this keto friendly or not? And that helps quite a bit too, is what I found.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I've have similar experience because I also didn't know all the keto foods. Like I was learning as I go. So I would
Yeah.
check and see, and then if it's not, giving it up, and like that, I would learn without having that extensive list that we now all have access to. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Tell us more about the any specific changes in terms of your experience with this diet for ADHD. Was there any specific changes that you had to make for the ADHD specific symptoms? Is there anything that stands out that you can recommend or that you can think
Like
of?
like in terms of how I maybe had to modify the diet or integrate the diet.
Yeah, the whole implementation. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I honestly feel like that was the bigger piece was just like really being prepared in advance. So like I printed off like two or three casserole recipes and I just knew in advance this is what I have to make and that is it. Like I couldn't think past that because otherwise there's a whole organizational piece that I just couldn't deal with or I would have gotten overwhelmed with, and then I might not have even initiated doing the diet because I would have sort of been stuck.
Hmm.
So for me that was such a key piece, is just like, how do I really simplify what I'm eating and make it only like 10 food items max, and that's all I can focus on consuming for those first little bits. I mean, the other piece here too, I also have a very supportive husband. He would always do a lot of cooking in the house, so I could rely on him too. Like he made me like little keto kind of cheesecake recipes, so if I had any kind of like a sugar craving, as an example, there was, some kind of like a keto friendly, baked good that he would have prepared or made for me when he's making his own food. So that helps a lot too, just relying on supports if you have supportive people in your life, who are on board with this kind of thing. So that
Yeah.
actually helped quite a bit too. Yeah.
Yeah, what a blessing, I'm sure. And I'm curious because that is great, but the on the other hand, if he's not doing it with you, I'm sure that you have access to other foods that are non-keto friendly. So how did you deal with that? Like, was it challenging to be around carbs?
You know what? I think for the first week, I found it challenging because I really used to like, baked goods. And it's so funny because I don't even crave that stuff at all anymore. Um, but even in that circumstance, it was like if he had purchased something in the store that I just don't want to see or eat, I'd be like, you have to put it, like, he's quite tall. I'm like, you have to put it like at the very top cupboard and shove it back there so I just don't have to see it. Right? Kind of like that, like out of sight, out of mind.
Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, I have something that you said earlier though, like when I find that when this diet works, it works. And for me, like I was very lucky with how I transitioned into it. I didn't get any keto flu. If anything, I actually think I had more kind of like hypomanic type symptoms. Like it did disturb my sleep, and I'm a very good sleeper, but I was getting like a lot of just really interesting, vivid dreams. I would wake up throughout the night. I didn't have to sleep as much. Throughout the day, my energy kind of shot up and then it restabilized after. So I felt very, very good, or maybe almost too good in some ways during the transaction. So I was good to stick with it, right? Where I know some other people can get very, very sick from it, and then that's a lot harder. Unfortunately for me, I didn't have that experience. So it was easy for me to stick to it because it was really pleasant and because I got that clarity so soon. It was in a matter of a couple of days, I felt really clear, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and in some ways it was similar, like regaining that clarity was similar for me as being on Concerta, but I don't get the crash. I get more of a consistency feeling with it. Like it's more, you know, like the energy is kind of more fluid throughout the day where I'm not getting like the peaks and the depths, where Concerta, like it would help throughout the day. And then you get this massive crash and all your symptoms come back. This was perfect because it's like none of my symptoms come back unless my ketone levels drop, right? But it's a nice similar kind of relaxed feeling where I have a lot of clarity. And in some ways, like it's when I really think about it, it's wild how incredibly different my brain functions now compared to if I'm not on the diet. It's like two different brains. Like I don't even, I wish that there was a way I could give somebody like a better description of what that feels like, but it really just is a night and day difference. Like it's hard to put into words because it is so experiential.
100%. Yeah. And it was the same thing for me. I literally did not know my brain can perform at that capacity. I was unaware of it. So it
Yeah.
was a nice surprise to find out about. And I know a lot of people are curious about the levels of ketosis. Can you tell us briefly what have you found that works best for you? And even though with the understanding that it may vary for people, but it's just out of curiosity, is deep
Yeah.
ketosis working better for you?
Yeah. So what I have found, and actually this is something interesting that kind of happened to me too. So when I started keto in March, I didn't have a way to initially monitor my ketones because the Keto Mojo blood test reader wasn't available in Canada at that point. So I was having to utilize urine strips, which aren't always the most accurate, but you know what? They're cheap and affordable, and they'll tell you if you're in a ketosis, right? So they were at least helpful at that time. So probably for the first 2 months, I had no way of really monitoring my levels. And I was probably about 6 or 8 weeks in at one point. I was going to give up the diet because I was still using Carb Manager to track my macros. And there was one day where, my macros looked like they were good, but my total intake was down. So let's say, as an example, if my usual total intake for calories was 2,000, there was one day where it dropped to like, let's say 1,500. Maybe I didn't eat a meal or I wasn't hungry. And, that 25 grams of net carbs on 2,000 calories and 25 grams of net carb on 1,500 calories was enough to make a change where my ketones dropped and all of my symptoms came back. And luckily enough, I know that they dropped because I had just gotten the Keto Mojo reader a day or two before and I measured it because I actually wondered if maybe my ketones were getting too high or there was something strange going on because I couldn't quite figure out. Like my macros looked okay for the most part, right? But that 25 grams of net carbs, like I said, like you have to compare it to the intake of what you're actually consuming throughout the day too. So when I did my reading, it was on the lower side. It was about zero point 0.4, and I know that that's low enough that my symptoms will come back because I
Mhm.
felt very agitated. I felt very like overwhelmed, anxious, ruminating, racing thoughts. Like It's a really unpleasant feeling. And so when I got my Keto Mojo app and I started figuring that out, so I really do recommend having, a way to measure the ketone levels with, a blood glucose monitor as well. Because that helped me gain a better understanding of what I can eat and how it is impacting my ketones. And for me, to go back to answering your question, I find that as long as my ketones are over zero point 0.8, I'm usually pretty good. I have had times where it is over the 2.0 mark. It does feel better, but it doesn't feel like, as long as I'm over 0.8, I feel like I can still function a heck of a lot better than I can if I'm under that number. So I feel
Yeah.
like if I'm dropping below 0 0.8, I can feel it right away. And it's interesting because now that I, can actually see numbers and I can see how I feel in my body, I'll know like when my ketones are dropping, because I'll get all those symptoms starting to come right back.
So, have you noticed, I'm curious, any other symptoms other than the ADHD symptoms? And because it's such a holistic approach, right? That we're treating the system as a whole, and it's such a root cause treatment that it causes a whole wide range of things to happen in the body. So, what are some of the other things, if any, that you notice this helped with?
hmm One of the biggest ones for me was honestly like just like a lot of GI gastro issues, right? So having upset stomachs very frequently before. At one point, this was actually a few months before I went on a keto diet. At one point I was getting like such bad stomach pains, like I was going for ultrasounds to see like, do I have gallstones? Like what is going on? So I feel like that's improved it like immensely.
Mhm.
Even in terms of just women's health, I feel like that's improved. So, right? Like, so if it's the time of the month where I'm going to be having my period, I don't get nearly as sick with
Mhm.
those symptoms. I I don't get like cramps. Like it was very frequent before that, maybe every third or fourth month, I would have to miss work because I was feeling so sick. And that has not happened since I've been on this diet. And the other thing I noticed was joint pain. I used to get kind of sporadic joint pain in my knees from time to time, usually in the winter, and that doesn't happen the way that it used to at all. So it has actually improved quite a few things.
Amazing, amazing.
hmm
To be objective, I always also like and ask myself. So I would love to hear from you. Have you noticed any downsides or any negative side effects of the diet?
Yeah. The biggest one for me, which was also another kind of point in time where I was like, oh, do I stick this out or not? Was, you know, I felt like for the first probably 8 weeks, it really compromised my gym routine. So in
Um,
terms of strength training specifically, like I really, really had a hard time lifting weights. Um, and I remember at that time, I know somebody who's doing a carnivore diet and they were like, no, like it will get better, just stick with it. And they kind of cheerleaded me on and it did improve. And it
mhm.
got back to where it was before. But I feel like that was the hardest thing for me to overcome, is like that was really important for me. And it was kind of frustrating being like, I know I have the energy to do it, but I didn't feel like I had the strength to do it,
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of impact, I'm curious, how do you compare the impact of keto compared to the impact of medication? Is one better or stronger, or how do you describe that for you?
Yeah, you know what? So I would say that for me, the diet is substantially better than the medication. Medications can be really important. Like I said, I took medication consistently for a year, and when I took that medication for a year, a lot of that was to try to change patterns and behaviors that I had established, right? So I know I gave earlier the example of like trying to get ready to go out. That would be very frequent for me before, where it's like I have to change my outfit multiple times, even before going to work in the morning. Like a standard thing I do every day, I still sometimes would have to change my outfit 4 or 5 times. And this isn't a one off. This was like every day I had to change my outfits. So when I took the Concerta, I was able to kind of focus on changing those types of habits, and that improved. But with the diet specifically, like I was kind of saying earlier, there's just more consistency. You're not getting the crashes. I also feel like too that with the diet, and I don't know, this might make sense or not, but with the medication, I felt like it almost, sort of looking for, it kind of like suppressed my creativity in a lot of ways, and it suppressed my drive because I am a very ambitious person, and I don't get that with the diet. So it's like I'm getting the benefits that I had with the medication, where I feel clear, my mood feels incredibly stable, but I still feel like, you know what, I feel still driven and I can still feel creative. Because I remember when I took the medication, there were times where I was like, I kind of miss the old me. I kind of miss how things were before. And on this diet, I'm like, this is me. Like, I love how I feel being on this diet. I don't have any regrets, like it's just, it becomes a lifestyle. And for me specifically, it's completely changed my life. It's changed my relationships. Like my husband notes all the time. He's like, this is amazing. Like just how much more present you are. And like, just how you're not struggling in the ways that you were before, and you're not anxious, and you're not ruminating, and you're not coming to me first thing on a Sunday morning with a list of 30 things that need to get done in an hour because it's impossible, like so many of those things have just, subsided. It's improved relationships, it's improved my work, and also memory retention. I was thinking about this the other day, and like when you're on a computer and you're logging in and you get the verification number on your phone, so it's like the authenticator apps, and it's usually a 6 digit. Before, I couldn't look at it, remember it, and put it in. I would always have to like go back and forth, like one number or two numbers at a time. And now it's like I can look at it, put the phone down, put the number in, no problem. So just even the smallest thing like that, looking at a 6 digit, remembering it, and then just shifting over and putting it in here, I couldn't do that before. Just such a simple thing.
Yeah, I cannot tell you, just hearing all of that, that's such a profound, such a powerful change in the depth of it, right? It's amazing how a diet changes your mental resilience, like your
Yeah.
relationship. What I love about it is that it impacts everything, like your overall
Yeah.
quality of life gets better. And what a blessing without the side effects. Or another favorite thing for me, and I'm not sure if how that relates to you, but also the power of being able to control how good you want to feel. Like literally
Yeah.
the position of determining how deep ketosis you want to be in, because you know that that's how you feel at that level. Or and for you it's not that dramatic. For me, definitely there was more benefits at the higher levels where I can sense them, but I could settle on certain days with less. But like not relying on external medications or something, that is a huge inspiration, at least for me. And just knowing that you are in charge of your own health, and that is.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's kind of like, it's almost kind of like this magic thing you can keep in your toolbox too, right? Like if you know there's a stressful event coming up, try to jack those ketones up so you can get through it easier, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly. And also with metabolic flexibility, you can potentially further down the road, depending on your personal experience and tolerance, at least that was the case for me, you can also allow a little bit more flexibility and quickly get back
mhm.
to it if needed. Also, being out of it for me over time changed how I felt, so that I felt started not experiencing the symptoms of being out of ketosis with the same severity they were in the early.
Right.
So it's just, again, getting back to that healing on cellular level that's just priceless. And yeah, such a powerful therapy. Thank you so much for sharing. I would love to also hear from you in terms of advice for others, because this is why we're here, right? Talking about this, walking the walk, like having our personal experience. But for someone who is listening and who is in the same place where you were at, what advice would you give for them?
Yeah. You know what? Like, I think what really helped me when you asked that question was looking up the people who were currently talking about these issues. So for me, like I said, I came across Chris Palmer and the brain energy theory. I did a lot of research into that, which then led me to Dr. Georgia Ede, who talks a lot about, nutritional psychiatry. Came across Metabolic Mind, which is a great resource. And I almost feel like I needed to kind of read and learn and hear from a lot of those people in the field, then feel comfortable enough to go on this journey. Because like I said earlier, I already had the suspicion that a ketogenic diet would help me, but it's almost like I needed that external validation and I needed to hear it from experts to be like, oh, okay, like I can actually trust myself to do that. Right. So I think that that was a big piece of it for me. I also think too, when I was starting to do it, like my husband was fully on board with it. It was actually, it's kind of funny because now that I'm looking back and reflecting on this, around the time that I heard about the brain energy theory, I was on a trip with a bunch of friends, and two of them had also listened to the same podcast, and we were talking about it. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to try this keto thing. And they were very supportive too. So I also think that that helped, that a lot of people, in my vicinity were on board with me trying it. So I didn't get a lot of pushback, so I was very lucky and very fortunate in that sense. And I understand that not everybody's going to have that opportunity because there are a lot of very skeptical people, when it comes to this. And I mean, too, I work in mental health. I'm a mental health practitioner, and I can tell you right now, I already know that there's a lot of people, who wouldn't be on board, who are mental health clinicians, because they just don't fully understand it. And that's okay, because that's not where I'm doing the work here. I'm not speaking to those people. I'm speaking to the people who are willing to listen, right? And who want, to try these strategies for themselves and implement these types of interventions. So, I think that that's a key piece, is trying to find your supports, and even doing the research around, like I said, Chris Palmer and Dr. Ede. There can be a supportive feeling just knowing that there's experts talking about it. The
Yeah.
other thing too that I do recommend, like, I really wish that I would have had the opportunity to track my ketones earlier on. I just didn't have it because it didn't exist in Canada where I'm located. But I do think that that's a pretty crucial piece too, is to have a way to monitor the ketone levels precisely if you can, because I just think that there's a lot of learning in that. And then there's also just a lot of validation in that too, right? Like if you're feeling good and you're like, wow, my reading is like 1.2, that helps validate yourself and your own experience as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love that. Do you have some favorite resources?
Yeah. So you know what? I relied on Metabolic Mind quite a bit from the start because there's so many resources on there. It's a fantastic page and website, so I definitely recommend that. Um, in terms of resources and recipes, the Keto Mojo recipe page, I use recipes from that all the time. Like I really, really highly recommend that as well. I'm trying to think too what I've recommended to clients specifically. So anything to do with Dr. Palmer, Dr. Georgie Ede. I've recommended people to your meetup groups. I think again, like that's absolutely fantastic, just to create a supportive environment around this.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, yeah, but those are the kind of the main ones that come to my mind in terms of resources.
Yeah, yeah. And I think starting with metabolicmind.org, that's the website, but that's such a vetted and up-to-date website that
Mm-hmm.
has it all in there. And then if you want to dive deeper into certain field, then you can look for
Yeah.
other resources. But I feel like it's such an absolute comprehensive starting point that you can go wrong with that. And yeah, it leads you to other resources as well if you want, like books and all of it.
Mm-hmm.
That hub of people to get started with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think
amazing.
for myself too, just, you know, the podcasts specifically were helpful for me because I would have struggled before with reading and absorbing information, and podcasts were just an easier way for me to get that
Mhm.
information, you
Yeah.
know? So like even something like reading a book, like The Brain Energy book by Chris Palmer is great. There's the Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind by Dr. Eid. Fantastic book. But I feel like I still have to take those in snippets because there's a lot of information to take in, right? Where if I listen to a podcast, I feel like I can just take in more information in a half hour than I might reading a book. But that's just me and how I absorb
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. Amazing. And I am curious about how you see your future in terms of dealing with ADHD. Do you even see yourself ever getting off the diet, or how do you see yourself, I guess, in the future in terms of your symptoms, diagnosis, and the diet?
Yeah. So it's interesting too, because even right now, when I think about how I feel, it's almost like sometimes I question, right? Like, is this actually ADHD? And I mean, I feel like it is because every time I kind of faltered off the diet for a day or two, all the symptoms just rush right back in again. This is something that was evident, my entire life, but I feel so much better that those symptoms don't impact me. And again, now I have a comparable that I didn't have before. Right now I actually know what it feels like to relax, and I can actually just sit and relax. I couldn't do that before. So for me, when it comes to what is this going to look like long term, I'm not in a rush to come off the diet. Maybe at some point I might slowly start to integrate different foods back in to see if there's certain foods that react more than others. But I feel so good. It's kind of this idea, like, don't mess with a good thing. Like, when I think about, like, if I could, I don't know, if one day they were like, you can never do a ketogenic diet again for some reason, like, let's just say it's a complete, like, hypothetical situation, I would be incredibly anxious coming off the diet because I
Yeah.
don't I don't want to feel like that again.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like you're just at a great place where you love the food you eat. It doesn't
Mhm.
burden, it comes easy, naturally. It has become a lifestyle. What you're getting out of it is exactly what you want. So it seems like you're in your own version of optimal health.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so for sure. Yeah, yeah.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, I know other may want to reach out and connect with you because again, keto for ADHD has not been as widely talked about. So tell us where we can find you, where people can reach out and connect with you if they would like to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have a website that will have how you can access me through email, through phone, and it's just my name. So it's natashasmikles.com, NATASHASMIKLES .com. I'm also on Instagram, and I just started an X account, so you could also connect with me those ways as well. But I think through either of those ways, you should be able to find a way, to connect, ask questions, and please ask questions too, because again, like, we are kind of a smaller community in this sense, and spreading this word and talking about these experiences is incredibly important. Like, I wish, in some ways that I would have known about this sooner, or at least that I could have trusted myself to implement this again sooner than I did. And I'm very, again, like, the word that's coming to mind is grateful. I am very grateful that I came across that podcast that one day, because that was a pivotal moment for me where that really did change the trajectory of my own mental health and my physical health, and just, getting me to a place where I feel so much better.
Mm.
So I really do encourage, if people have questions or if they want to reach out, please reach out, because we have to support each other in this. It's so incredibly important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your willingness to share your time, your experience so openly and just honestly. I think it's very valuable and I really appreciate it. And I just love seeing you, like you're radiating that everything you're talking about, the happiness, the full, like you just feel good and it shows. And I'm excited about the people you get to help with through your profession, but also for your family and everyone around you. You're a walking example of what is possible when we take good care of ourselves and really rely on natural, holistic treatments since that has always been a passion of mine. So I really appreciate you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And I'm looking so forward to continue doing projects together, just being in touch and evolving and growing and learning more about what else is out there that can support us to thrive and help others to do the same.
Yeah, no, I feel the exact same. I really do. So, no,
you.
thank you. Yeah, thank you again for this opportunity. And like I said, at the very start, I hope that this is going to be helpful for somebody. And when I think about life, I always think about this idea of a ripple effect, right? It's just sometimes that one action or that one thing you do can cause, more actions. And I feel like that's part of what we're doing here, right? It's just like if it can help one person, then that could help more people, and that's how we kind of spread the word on this and help support this community.
100%, absolutely. 100% agree with you. And no better way than sharing authentically and openly. I feel like there is no better way to inspire others, because then
Absolutely.
they can resonate and they can follow the lead. I know that's what I needed when I was on my journey. So yeah, amazing. Well, hopefully we'll get to collaborate more, and maybe we'll do another episode of evolvements and just tips and tricks as things progress and continue. But I appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to more interactions in the future. Thank you, Natasha.
Great. Yes, you're very welcome. Thank you too.